Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Sorry for starting things a little late. We're just working out some technical difficulties with maybe some Wi-Fi issues or a little bit of lag, but I think we're good. I'm gonna bring McKendree back on and see how we're doing. Are we
I
good to
think
go?
we're good. Well, we'll see what happens, but I can see you, you can see me. So I think we are good to go.
Excellent. It's for some reason you can't blur your background. They really
No,
just
so
want.
you're getting this. This is the background. Y'all get the full picture.
I mean, your office is very neat, so I don't think people are there's not too much distraction going on back there.
Perfect. You might see the pups at some point out the windows, but other than that, we'll be good to go.
Welcome everyone again. Really excited to be here with McKendree and talk all things recognition, renaissance, and how to optimize your recognition program with manager support. So really excited to have McKendree joining me today to talk about all things. She's the head of facilitation at LifeLabs Learning, but I'm really going to pass it over to her to talk about what LifeLabs does, what her role is there, and give us a little bit of background on what she's all about. So, McKendree, if you let us know.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Yeah, my name is McKendree Hickory. I am the head of facilitation at LifeLabs Learning, and we are a go-to resource for training and development, specifically for managers, trainers. That's what I do. Managers, executives, and teams. And our approach is really focusing in on how do we train managers and leaders on the core skills of excellent leadership. So things around coaching and feedback, behaviors of inclusion, and a bunch of other things that we'll get into here as we dive into this topic on recognition.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And I'll do my obligatory introduction. My name is Noah Warder. I'm the head of people over here at Guusto. And Guusto, we do all things recognition, but we kind of do a little bit more than that. We're kind of positioning ourselves less as we're more than just recognition, because recognition is so much more than just appreciating people. And so we're really trying to take the approach of, we're helping companies build culture through recognition. And so, we're taking a little bit of a different approach from that. We're looking at making recognition really transparent, really easy, really flexible, and inclusive to all people at your organization, whether they're behind a desk or not, whether they have an email address or not. And then, maybe they have an old school cell phone that isn't actually a smartphone. You can still send those people recognition. That's kind of the way that we approach this. Is we want to be really inclusive and make sure everyone's getting that recognition, and executives and managers are involved, and everyone's involved in that regard. And so making it flexible, making it easy, and making it fun to start small programs and grow the programs instead of just kind of going all in at once. So that's kind of what Guusto is all about. But we're not really here just to talk about Guusto and LifeLabs Learning. We're really here to talk about recognition, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today doesn't just have to be about recognition programs. It's really about any type of HR program that you're going to be implementing, that you need that manager and executive support, and you need those people involved to make the program successful. So I'm super stoked to jump into this conversation and get things rolling. Before we start asking questions and I start getting McKendree to give us all of her great knowledge. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We can see them, and we'll bring them up and we'll answer them as we're going along. If you have any comments, anything you really want to include into the conversation, drop it into a comment and we'll see it, and we'll be able to bring it up on screen so everyone can see it, and have that discussion. This isn't just McKendree and I talking at all y'all out there in the internet world, but we want to have more of a discussion with you as well, answer your questions. And if you've got specific things that you're trying to tackle, let us know. We can help you. That's why we're here. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into things. And so I know we wanted to start things off pretty broad, McKendree, and jump in with this first question, which is really just like, what people leader behaviors or skills support an effective recognition program? And I know this is where LifeLabs shines.
Yeah. I get so excited about a question like this because I think the reality is like all of them, like there's so many skills that excellent leaders and managers can do that are going to result in people feeling that recognition and the adoption of it. And one of the things we love to do is simplify complexity. So what I'll share is a framework that has been really helpful when I think about these skills. And I like to boil it down to the 3 R's. First one being role model, second one being reinforce, and then the third is all about reflection. So when I think about the people leader skills that can really help to build and encourage a recognition program, in that role modeling space, one of my first questions is like, well, are you giving feedback, right? Are you giving recognition? In what ways are you actually modeling the type of behavior you want folks to engage in? What I think is so cool about that is you have like the multi-layered impact of both you're giving recognition, right? So there's an impact, a direct impact to whoever's receiving it, but you're also then setting that norm of, hey, this is a culture where we engage in recognition. So I think role modeling it is a really critical one. On the reinforcement side, I try to think about like, how can I like give recognition to people who are giving recognition? So in many ways, what are the things that I am doing to reinforce the behaviors that link up to really effective recognition or the program that we're looking at? And how can I then encourage people to do that more regularly? And then on the reflection side, I think of some pretty critical questions that leaders, managers can be asking themselves is, in what ways am I like getting in the way of people giving recognition? And so I think that links back up to role modeling. If I'm not modeling it or I'm not doing it, that might be getting in the way. But maybe I make it really hard for people to even have like the space to engage in recognition, or I haven't actually used a cool platform tool that makes it simple for people to do it. So knowing in what ways am I like preventing it from happening, and in the same time, then what ways am I encouraging it, which goes into the modeling it themselves. I could go into like so many more, but I'll pause there. But I'd say those 3 R's are really at least nice foundation place to start kind of assessing where might we be able to do better and promote even more the program we're trying to build.
I love that. I love it. And because like, no matter how fancy a tool you have, no matter how simple it is, no matter how great it is, it's just really that's the delivery method. But if you're not getting the people to like actually do it, like you said, role model it, if you're not reinforcing that behavior, it's just not going to happen. And if you remove roadblocks, like so often we've heard of or talk to clients who are like, our recognition program doesn't work. We're like, well, tell us about it. And they're like, well, there's all these approvals that you have to go through. Like if you want to give a monetary reward, it's like, even if it's like $10, it's like the manager's got to get HR approval, who then gets finance approval. And it's like, you gotta remove all of those barriers. Just make it easy for people to do it.
Yeah, I love that you said it. It makes me think of we have a leading change workshop, and one of the simplest tools is like, how do you make it simple for people to do it? Like, how do you make it like 1 point lighter on a heavy scale to light scale to make it just simpler for people to engage in it? Because people are so busy and they want to do this, but if it's not easy for them to do it, which I'm sure that I would love, if there's any other examples, I'd love to hear that what you all have seen, because I'm sure removing those barriers has got to be simple and also like hard to get people on board to think through that process together.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that we really coach our clients on is allowing for a lot of trust with something like a recognition program. So empowering people to run with it in the way that they think is best, because, as HR leaders, we always have this, golden nugget of how we think a program is going to be able to run and do all those things. But it's actually the managers who know their people best and are going to be able to recognize their people best. And so allowing them to, kind of run the program how they see best, with a little bit of coaching and a little bit of insight and a little bit of prodding here and there on how to do things well, but really empowering them and allowing them to run with the program. We've seen the most success with that, with all of our clients of like, who let their managers run with the program. They say, here's the framework, we want you to kind of like align with our values, make sure that, the things that you're recognizing align with our values or our mission or whatever they're trying to reinforce, whatever behavior they're trying to reinforce. And then they empower them with like, here are the tools. They educate them on how to use the tools. They make it really easy. And then they kind of connect those managers together as well, so that they can have conversations internally of like, what are you doing that you see as successful? What are you doing that you see as successful? Oh, I did this and it didn't work very well, so don't do that. And, making sure that those kind of 3 things are all happening with regards to their recognition programs is what we've seen very successful.
Yeah.
And it's again like that framework of like, you use the 3 R's. We like to use the ACE model of like, you make sure you're aligning people, you're empowering them, and you're connecting them.
Yeah, so cool. And it makes so much more. It's so much. I think like as a people ops leader, HR leader, like it makes your job that much easier too, because if you're delegating and saying, hey, you're the experts in your team, you tell us what's working well, and then they share with others. Like that's less pressure on me to have like the right answers or the right way to roll this out. So I love that. I think that individual approach sounds awesome.
Yeah, and it also allows you to take a pilot approach to this. It's like, okay, maybe I've got like a manager or an executive who's really on board with doing a recognition program. Let's start with their department. and see how it goes. And then, whatever success finds there, great. Now let's share it with all the other departments. And it's then it's not HR saying, this is how you do it. It's fellow managers and executives saying, hey, we did it with our team, and here are all the things that we found successful, and here are a couple of things that we did wrong. And having that nice sort of knowledge share at a company level instead of more of the HR telling people how to do it. That always creates more inclusion. It creates higher buy-in. And then I'd say the barrier for success is lowered. And the barrier for just implementing something is lowered because you're starting with a small department and then you expand from there.
Yeah, very cool. When you said barriers, my ears perked up because I think that's like such a challenge is how to get adoption, how to get buy-in in this. And I will always default to like, well, do you know what research says? So I am curious, like what benefits have you all seen in your work that would really boost it, whether it's morale or engagement? Like what are some of the things that you all lean into to help create that adoption of recognition programs?
There's a medley of data out there that shows how important recognition is. And we talk about this ad nauseum. And I think there's a little bit of misconception around, recognition versus perks versus culture. And I think sometimes those things all kind of get muddied together. People think like recognition is just saying thanks to people. It's so much more than just saying thanks to people. It's really acknowledging them where they are. And again, like tying it back, reinforcing that behavior that you want to see. And, sometimes tying it into like real objectives or things that you want to, goals you want to achieve. So let's take an example, like one of your goals as an organization is you want to like really promote learning and development and upskill your team and do all those kind of things, is you can tie your recognition program to that. So as managers and individual contributors are all upskilling, going through certification programs or having to do even mandatory like bias training and that kind of stuff, having them come out of that and share learnings, and then you recognize them for that. You give them recognition, you can give them a monetary reward, or even getting peers to recognize each other in those certifications for their contributions is really great way to, reinforce that type of behavior of like, we're a learning organization here. Great. Recognize people for learning new things and bringing it back to the organization. It's again, reinforcing and aligning people and getting them to do those things. But like, we can just do like a couple of quick stats. Let's throw out some stats out there. Here's a good one. 88% of organizations that tied employee recognition to the core values of their organization said their programs helped instill and reinforce those values. So if you have new values, or you're doing a values change, or you have values and all they're doing is sitting on a wall or an intranet somewhere and people aren't really living them, and you want people to start living them a bit more, having a recognition program that ties recognition to those values will really start to ingrain them in your cultural DNA. Another one is by Deloitte, found that companies that scored in the top 20% for building a recognition-rich culture had 31% lower turnover rates. So that's huge. That's huge. Like we all know how hard retention is right now. We all know how hard it is to keep our key players. And something as simple as recognition can boost your retention rates by 30%. And that's not insignificant.
No, I know there's also a Gallup study that happened a couple different times, but speaking to even like folks who are not recognized are 5 times as likely to want to leave an organization. And I believe they even like replicated that and found that it was even higher in the last like couple of years. And you think about, man, that's so easy to do. Like, I think sometimes we can run the risk of like overcomplicating, like we need to have all of these things and we need to have all of this, and people aren't satisfied unless they're growing every single day. You're like, well, it might also just be in saying, hey, the work you did on that project, this is the impact it had. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for bringing that skill set here. And something you were speaking to earlier that I think is so important, and I'm hearing in the research as well and seeing in our own work, is just the power of that specificity too, and how important it is to move away from what we would call like blurry feedback that's not effective, or blurry recognition that's like, you're doing great. Again, feels fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the difference of knowing here's the exact behavior you did, or here's how you showed up, here's how you lived into that value, and the specificity of it. It just is so much more important than building that culture where people actually see the behaviors that we want reinforced over time versus people feel like they're doing great, but they don't know why or like what it is that they're doing to add value.
100% too. And the research also points to like millennials and Gen Z, they're craving so much more growth and they want to know specifically what they're doing well. And so when you just keep saying you're doing a great job, that's never good enough for them.
Yeah.
They need to know exactly what they're doing well and exactly what they can improve upon. Another interesting thing that we just kind of like learned recently was that, if you want to give a piece of critical feedback to somebody, you almost have to build up this bank of trust with them before you can give that to them. Of like, you need to do all the things that we are just talking about, recognize them with specific things that they're doing really well. And for every piece of like critical feedback that you're giving to them on things that they need to improve upon, you almost have to have built up 5 pieces of positive recognition so that it's not, so they're like, okay, I'm doing a great job. And this piece of critical feedback is not a reflection on me as an employee that I'm doing poorly. It's just one of those things that I can work on. And so by building up that sort of base of trust and that recognition bank, if you will, on what they're doing really well, they're much more open to receiving that critical feedback from managers as well. And so there's all these other things that, like, we just learned this not too long ago when we're in the business of recognition.
Totally.
Like, oh, that is super cool.
Totally. Yeah, it makes me, I know that there was some initial research on that in like marriage and family therapy as well. And apparently it works in other relationships. I always like to try it out and see if it works outside of work as well. But I love the metaphor of the bank because we think about you're depositing, and then there's that withdrawal and like, hey, here's the thing that's not working. But when you do that, and when you're giving constructive feedback in a very specific data-driven way, it's so much easier for someone to hear that and then have this like almost like a weighted perspective of themselves of like, okay, I'm still good. And there's some things that I can continue to work on versus that just derailing, which I think undercuts culture so often when all it is just the critical. And I think it's also, just to speak to it, I think it's a lot harder in the remote environment as well, in any type of hybrid situation, because you don't have as much visibility into people's work. And so the ability to kind of name the 5 positives before the critical can take some time to like be that much more intentional, I think, for leaders to be on the hunt essentially for the things that they can acknowledge and recognize people for.
Exactly. And it also builds a written running record of what people are doing well. And especially if you have a peer recognition program, then you're getting those other viewpoints of what people are doing well, because as a manager, as an executive, you really only have that one touch point with your direct reports. When you're doing one-on-ones or if you're working on a project with them, you don't get to see them in that multifaceted way that their peers get to see them as well.
Yeah.
So peer recognition programs are great, not only to increase belonging and have people kind of like build trust and rally around each other and reinforce those behaviors, but it also arms managers with all this extra information for when they move into career conversations and feedback sessions and all these other things that, they have this breadth of knowledge that they didn't get to have otherwise. And it's all there. It's for them to review. And it's also for them to show to their employees, their team members, if they kind of have those moments of crisis of like, oh, I've been doing terribly, I've got all this critical feedback lately. It's like, yeah, you have, and maybe you stumbled a little bit, but look at all this historical feedback that you've received, and you're doing a great job. We just need to work on this one area.
Yep, totally. It makes me think about too. It makes it that it almost removes. I don't know, as an employee, one of the things that when we're training people on feedback, we often are like, it's really important for you to pull for feedback. And sometimes people can have a lot of hesitancy around that. Like either the culture doesn't feel like one that values that, or I don't trust my manager, or I don't want to like self-promote. And so I love this idea of like building that recognition bank, because it gives that visibility without me having to, I got some nice feedback this morning and I was like, do I just forward this to my manager and be like, hey, people think I'm great? Like that's hard for people to do. And I think there's some skill to do that successfully. And so I love this idea that a great recognition program is going to capture and make it visible. And so it's not all on me as the employee to have the skill of self-promotion in order for somebody to know that I've done a good job beyond what my manager might be able to see. So I just think it's such a cool way to leverage that for the culture too.
Yeah. And it if it's done well and if it's done right, it promotes equity and inclusion, because, those people who are a little bit quieter with their managers, but are getting recognized more by their peers, there's that recognition, that feedback that things are going really well for those people as well. So you get to see them in their, best light as well. And maybe they're quieter. They're not the ones in the meeting speaking up. They're not the ones that are putting their hands up every single time when, a new project is being put up, but they're those solid performers that, you still really want to engage and make sure that they're getting the promotions, they're getting the growth opportunities and all those other things.
Yeah, it makes me, it's what is coming up for me. Again, I'm like such a research nerd at my core and theorist. It's made me think of the optimal distinctiveness theory and this idea that when we're at work, we have these strong desires to both feel like I'm a unique contributor and then also belong at the same time. And so I love that you're speaking to this, that a good, healthy recognition program is going to create an opportunity for those things to emerge, right? Where people are getting, their strengths are getting named, they're getting recognized beyond just the one relationship with their manager. And I think that paints a better picture of what is my unique value add to this organization? How do I show up at the team? How do I support people? And then by that, I can create more opportunities for belonging because I have more insight into how the person is showing up. So it just feels like it's a recognition. I don't want to oversell it, but man, you can actually accomplish so much with really recognizing people in a truly authentic and specific way.
Yeah, and that's the key, that specificity. That's so important. And I think this is a good kind of jumping off point to Kathleen's question that kind of came in through the comments of how do you prevent recognition programs with award winners from becoming a quote unquote participation award? And I think this happens a lot. And, early days in my career, this was feedback that I got when we had a recognition program, that it just kind of became a popularity contest of who's the most visible person and who's the most outspoken. And so I don't know if you've ever been able to coach clients on this, McKendree. Obviously we coach clients on this all the time, but I'd love to hear how you've seen this before I kind of give my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm thinking of an organization I used to work with, and we had a recognition program, and it was the IT support was the number one group of people that got recognized because they solved problems that none of us could. Very, very warranted and valid. But I think, so for me, it always goes back to what is the purpose that we are trying to accomplish with this recognition program? And so if we are doing it for the sake of just doing it, we chatted with these people, I went to this webinar, I hear it's a good thing, let's do a recognition program. I think it is likely to then lead into something that's just participating or it's just for show rather than actually having commitment and buy-in. And so a couple immediate things, I go to the strategic thinking lens on this, and how do we link this program to something that's really important? And Noah, you spoke to this in the beginning, but I think how is this linked to our org level goals? And is it connected to something that is more meaningful than just participation award? So linking it to a goal. So for example, if we were to do this at LifeLabs, one of our current goals as an organization is grow ourselves. And it's a bit of a theme around performance, but I want to be able to speak to how recognition is directly connected to our ability to increase our performance over time. And so connecting it to something really meaningful and linking it up in that way, I think is one way to do it. But then I think it's also about training people with the effective skills, because if it does just become this thing that's yeah, you're doing great, keep it up, then it's not really going to be meaningful. But if you actually equip people with the core skills of how to give that really effective recognition that is meaningful, people are going to want to buy into it because it actually is meaningful to them. So those are 2 immediate things that come to my mind is training people with the right skills and then connect it to a meaningful organizational goal. And then probably, an opportunity is to give feedback on it. And so if people are just doing it for show, calling that out and saying, hey, what's the impact you think we're having? Or what's the impact by not giving more meaningful feedback through this system? I could go on a bunch. Those are 3 immediate things. No, I'd love to hear from your experience as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we like to kind of talk to our clients about, and we do ourselves internally, is we kind of audit departments and managers and see how they're recognizing people. So as a people team, I'll look and be hey, so-and-so, this person on your team is not getting recognized. What's going on there? Are they underperforming? Is there a problem here? Or are they just one of those people who's a little bit quieter and is not as loud? But you as a manager need to make more of an effort to include that person in this program. Mm-hmm. So auditing managers and their recognition programs and saying, and using that as an opportunity in their performance and growth of hey, I'm seeing these 3 people on your team getting a lot of recognition and these 2 or 3 people on your team who are not getting a lot of recognition. What's going on here? And, you said the role modeling is so important of like, you're not recognizing these people. You're only recognizing these people. What's happening there? Is there a performance issue that they're not getting recognized for? If so, that's a different conversation that we should be having. But if it's just like, are you kind of playing a little bit of favoritism here? Then here's a coaching opportunity for me to help you be a better manager, more inclusive for the people on your team. And so, like you said, helping people learn how to give good recognition, how to kind of tie that to an objective, and then rewarding those objectives is really important. And there is a lot of coaching and a lot of training that happens to this. And there will be, times when there's a bit of an participation award, and you will see some teams get a bit more recognition than others just because they're a bit more visible and they're, I always like to think like our organization, our product team gets a lot of recognition because they're working with engineering, they're working with QA, they're working with marketing, they're working with sales, they're working with customer support. Like they are in the middle of everybody. And so they're working with so many different people. And so often they'll get a lot of recognition, but the recognition is always very specific, and it is tying back to our core values. And it is for those things that are, might be outside their scope of expertise, but they were like, hey, I'm going to go learn this thing and figure it out for you. And I think that's the other part of it. It's not just for showing up, which can be that participation award of like, thanks for doing that thing that you do every day anyways. It's more of the like, thanks for doing this thing that was kind of above and beyond what you would normally do, but really helped me achieve something on my end.
Yeah, it makes me, I guess I do have a question. I'm curious if you ever recommend teams to like set a goal around it of like everybody should recognize. And if so, does it work? Or have you seen like that kind of fire effect of giving a goal that then leads to the participation award even more so?
We don't do that. We don't say, hey, everyone has to give 20 pieces of recognition today or this week for that reason of people are like, well, then I'm just going to start making this up. Things that we do to kind of reinforce it is one, during one-on-ones, managers will ask their employees, hey, who did you recognize this week? And so employees come to those one-on-ones with like 1 or 2, like, hey, I either haven't done it yet or I recognize this person last week for this thing. So it becomes a conversation that happens every week. At our executive sort of leadership meeting that we have every week, we do it as well. Hey, who did you recognize this week as executives? And it's you really like talking more about like, I try not to talk about anyone on my team. I talk about people I recognized on other teams, and other leaders will kind of do the same thing of like, I recognized, so someone will say, I recognize Julia because of how great she helped me hire this person on my team. Or like the way that she helped me figure out the interview process and set me up for success for interviewing candidates. I recognize her for that this week. And so, building it into the conversation on a weekly basis. And then at our all hands meeting, we do what we call a random draw, where we pull recognition from our platform and highlight 3 pieces of recognition and have the people talk about it. And so that's with the whole company. And it's completely random. And it's just like, it's a feature that we have in our program where you can click it and it comes up and somebody's there and it's like, oh, hey, say, Noah, you recognize Joe for leadership. Like, talk to us about this. Why did you do this? And then talks about it. And so those sort of signals that we have throughout meetings and conversations and reinforcing it helps make it more than a participation award, because we kind of have to justify why we're doing it, and tie it back to our core values and tie it back to the things that we're trying to achieve. And it's not just like, and we'll get called out if it's just like, hey, like, I recognize Julia for doing a great job. It's like, well, no, that's not good enough.
Totally. What I love about it is what I'm really hearing in that, and I think it totally aligns with how we think about behavior change at LifeLabs, of you can't just like give people a bunch of skills and then say, okay, go forth and change how you live your life. Good luck. Like embedding it into the rhythms and the systems you already have in place, I think allows it to truly then be a part of the culture and not this side dish of this thing that we do. And so I love that idea of like building it into templates with managers of like, have you given recognition? Have you asked about it? I think that the all hands or company newsletters are like easy opportunities to embed some of those like call out recognitions, and all of it then supports that entire culture. which I think we're both kind of speaking to, is that it can't just be this one-off thing, but truly has to be a cultural kind of shift towards recognition.
100%. And I think like Kathleen just has another piggyback question. So let's jump
Yeah.
into that too. We have a company-wide peer recognition program. How can we give team members more insight into what's happening in other departments? And so, there's some things that you can do really easily here. McKendree just talked about a couple of them: having it on your newsletter, making it part of your internet, making it part of like any monthly updates of like highlighting some of those pieces of recognition that are happening across the organization, I think is really, really great. I think having, if you're a Slack or Microsoft Teams company, having a dedicated channel that those recognitions are just kind of being piped into so people can see what's happening, whether you're using a tool or that's just where people give recognition. And then the other thing you can do is, like, if you're using a tool, make it open so people can see what other departments are doing. And I think that this is the key, is like, you want people from different departments to be recognizing people from other departments, because that'll break down silos. It'll increase collaboration and communication, and also increase belonging at work as well, because it's not just like we're the sales team and we only work with the sales people, and more like, I'm going to give recognition to marketing, I'm going to give recognition to product, I'm going to give recognition to engineering, because you know what, they got that feature out ahead of time, which will help me land this deal. So those things, I think, you want to promote, people giving recognition outside their department as well.
Yep. Yeah, it makes me think too, to that question, Kathleen, around also some teams are limited in their visibility to other departments. And so an immediate question for me is how do we create better visibility, like literally into that department, set aside the recognition, but just better understanding of what does team X do? Like, I'm not sure what they do. One thing we did at LifeLabs a couple of, probably like a year plus ago, that we've just now built into our onboarding, is we call it our Day in the Life series. And every team within the company did here's what it's like to be a facilitator. Here's what it's like to be an expert consultant, right? Here's what it's like to be on team enablement. And we bake those into onboarding so that folks now, even if I don't interact with team enablement on a daily basis, I'm aware that because of the work they do, we just hired somebody really excellent, right? Or the work that they did, the skill up is now on the calendar for next week. And so it also then, I think, gives people the scaffolding for then how to engage in giving recognition cross-departmentally, because they actually understand what the other teams do if they don't have that direct visibility themselves. So I think that's another component, is actually creating opportunities for folks to see. And we're huge fans of Slack or Team, whatever it is, like having an impact channel or a gratitude channel that constantly is creating that visibility for folks, especially the ones, because sales is way more visible, right? And there's often teams that are way less. And so making sure folks get recognized across the board.
Yeah. I always think of the DevOps people who only interact with engineering. They don't interact with anyone else.
Yep.
Yeah.
I used to joke at an old organization that I wanted to be the first non-salesperson to make it to President's Club, because I'm like, because of my coaching and these skills, you all are good at your jobs, but I want to show up, I want to be recognized the way you are.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I've done similar things where, it's like, what does Noah do all day? Presentations, because people are like, what does the head of people or HR actually do all day long? And I'm like, you're getting paid, you got your benefits, great, awesome.
Yeah, totally. You're welcome for that.
Yeah. Here's a question, and I'm going to actually defer this to Kaylee and our marketing team. Can we get closed captioning turned on? I don't know how to do that. Maybe somebody on the back end team can figure that out for me. But Lauren, we'll figure it out, and we'll try and get that going as soon as we can. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, let's kind of keep the ball rolling. I think one of these things that people always, especially from HR people, there might be I know we need a recognition program. I think it's a great idea. How do I get my executive team on board? How do I get them to say, okay, this is a good idea, you can have some budget for this, or yes, you can do this, maybe we don't have any budget, so you start with a non-monetary approach to things. And so, I'm sure you run up against this a lot at LifeLabs, because you do a lot of manager training and executive training and other types of training. And so helping people pitch to the executive team that this is a good idea and we should invest in this.
Yeah.
Recommendations.
Totally. Yeah. The thing that whenever people are like, how do I get my executives to fill in the blank? I'm like, solve a problem for them. What is a problem? What is something that is top of mind? How do we then link this to that? And so I think that, again, not trying to oversell recognition, but what, like, pick your poison, like which organizational challenge is important that you're trying to solve for, because we know that it impacts retention. It's going to impact loyalty. It impacts people's morale, engagement, productivity. And that's just not saying it, right? We know from research that we see those outcomes. So step one is I would try to be figuring out, okay, are we really focused on retention right now? Or did we just go through a reorg and maybe morale is low? How might we connect it to that so that we're helping to solve a problem, and then we're going to create incredible byproducts as a result of that. So I think being very strategic with figuring out, like, how does this make their lives easier or solve a problem that something's important. I also think about how do we make it simple and make it really data driven. So I know if I go to our CEO and I'm like, I have this idea, she's like, great, what's the data? How do you know? And so really using, right, if you can leverage engagement data or leverage other types of surveys and things internally, using that data to also support the case. I think you can't go wrong with that. If it's the research side, there's plenty of resources online to pull from. But I think making it simple, making it data driven, and help solve a problem, I think is at least going to get you attention. And then from there might be some additional things, but those would be the first things that I might start with. And then I think too, something that we don't often, I know that I don't hear people pitch as much, is also speaking to, like, what happens if we don't do this? So we can say that, like, hey, our bet is this is going to improve retention, and our bet is this is going to improve morale. But if we don't do it, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z continuing to happen, or the cost of us not engaging in recognition would be retention. So depending on, like, how I would say that your executive leadership team functions and, like, likes to engage in conversation, those are different approaches. But I think speaking to not doing it can also be a powerful play too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the pain versus the reward. Sometimes
Yep.
your executive needs to hear about the pain before they hear about the reward.
Yeah.
Another thing that we really recommend companies doing is taking sort of like the crawl, walk, run approach of, like, start with a little pilot program. Maybe it's just, I spoke to this earlier, maybe it's just one department that you're going to do it with and see how successful it is. And if it's a great success, then you can roll it out to, additional departments or the whole organization. Or you could start with just something really simple as, like, you know what, we are going to do a milestones program. We don't even have a milestones program, or we're going to revamp our milestones program so it's a little bit more modern and it's annually instead of the 5, 10, 15, because tenure doesn't really last that long anymore. Having a reward where someone's going to sit around for 5 years before they get it, we're probably not going to be sending so many of those out. But just doing simple things and being like, hey, we're going to just do this one thing. I think often in the HR world, and I totally do this as well, is we try and, like, boil the ocean. We want to be like, here's this great, incredible, huge program, and it's going to change everything. And we try and do way too much, and then it falls flat on its face because we try to manage way too much change. And so starting simple, starting small, and then expanding from there, we have found, especially with our clients who are trying to get that executive buy-in, and they might have one executive bought in.
Yep.
Great. Start with that executive's team.
Yep.
And be like, this is our proof of concept. It's going to cost this much, and we're going to assess in 6 months how well it worked. And then if it's, like, an outstanding success, they can't really say no. Like, you again, show them the data. This is where we were before we implemented this program. This is where we were halfway through. This is where we were at the end.
Right.
And look at the impact that it's had on maybe retention, engagement, our ENPS scores, whatever it may be. And then go from there. And I think a lot of times people just don't ask the question, do you feel recognized at work? Maybe just start with that question and see how people feel. And if it's, like, abysmally low, then, like, we should start recognizing people.
Totally. It makes me think too about the importance of doing the due diligence to also think through the entire implementation of that. And so even, I think folks get those great ideas, and we have cognitive biases that keep us from, like, poking holes in our own ideas, but play it out. Like, let's imagine we roll this recognition program. It doesn't go well, right? What got in the way of that? And so that you can also then be really wise and strategic with how you're rolling it out and piloting it at first. And so, one of the things that might happen is people don't engage in it because it's too complex, right? How can we solve for that? Or people don't engage in it effectively because they're just going to give vague recognition that's not useful. Cool. How do we train them on that? And so also, I think thinking about the pieces that will support that a full effective rollout, we'll make sure you get to that 6 months and be able to like speak to all the benefits and not just like, oh, it could have gone well, but we didn't think about X, Y, and Z when we first thought through this.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And it's kind of why we're here talking about how to get your managers and your executives on board, because that's so critical to a successful recognition program. So talking about, this is how we're going to enable and empower the managers who are involved. This is how we're going to get that executive involved, how we're going to get them to, role model and reinforce these behaviors that we want. And we're going to do, as a people team, we're also going to coach people and audit them on a monthly basis on their recognition. Like, hey, you're not recognizing your people. What's going on here? Is this too hard? And so having those touch points throughout the pilot program or the program and getting, ongoing feedback, what's hard, what's good, what's easy, and ensuring that you're addressing those problems very proactively as they come up.
Yeah. Can we role model what I just recommended? And can I ask about like, what might be some unintended consequences of doing a recognition program? Like, I guess, what are some of the like buyers beware that you might share? I'm happy to share too, but I'd be curious given what you all seen with your clients.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of things where you do have to, like, if you're not doing that coaching program, you're not doing that, you can get some, not great recognition for all of the wrong reasons. And so you can get some of those moments where you're like, oh, that needs to be like addressed instantly because somebody put something up that wasn't appropriate in the recognition channel or something like that. So coaching people around that and making sure it's safe. And, if you're a really large organization, you really need to manage that type of stuff. You have a little approval that needs to be in there, but then you have to be really proactive about your approval process. I think other unintended consequences, and again, if you have a really strong program with a lot of checks and balances, this shouldn't happen. But again, that equity piece where only those who are very visible are the ones who are getting all the recognition, and then they're continuing to get the promotions and the growth opportunities, and those who are not are being left behind. And that will actually increase your turnover rates because those who were already feeling a little bit on the cusp and not getting recognized enough are going to feel it so much more if those people are getting all the recognition, and will leave that much faster. And then there's this other piece that we always coach our clients on of like, not everyone likes the public recognition. And so having your managers engage with their team before recognition programs really start and asking them, how do you like to be recognized? Do you prefer it in like a private conversation or a private Slack or Teams channel where it's just me doing it or your peers doing it like one-on-one? And so it's not kind of like highlighted to the whole company. And learning who those people are and kind of surfacing them to executives and HR and being like, hey, these people don't like it when we recognize them publicly. So don't do it because it's going to cause a lot more damage than it is. And then like, depending on how you're recognizing people and if you're doing monetary rewards, making sure those monetary rewards are actually something they care about. There's a story that was shared from one of our clients where like, higher executive on the people team, there was a leader that was like super happy with the work that they did. And we're like, hey, I'm going to take you to a Raptors game and we're going to go and you're going to come into Toronto and we're going to do all these things. And we're da-da-da. He's like, this sounds terrible. I have to leave my family for a night and go to this game that I don't really care about to sit with this person whom I don't really like for an evening. That sounds awful. Can you make them not do that? Like that was the like, this recognition feels bad and it's making me do something I don't want to do. So making sure that when you are recognizing people, if you are providing a reward, making sure that it's actually something they care about or flexible enough that they can pick something that they care about.
That individual consideration. I think that's like where that ties all of these things together, that not only the specificity of the recognition, but how they want to. I'm thinking of a woman on my team who's like, I have just begged her. I'm like, are you sure you don't want to be a leader? Like, you're sure you don't want to be a manager? Because she's just amazing. But she would much rather be in the background and help design programs and stuff. And so one thing that I've really tried with folks that really, really do not, and I sometimes can poke fun with that. Like, I know they're going to hate this, but I'm recognizing them. And I've had to really stop that. So I know they really don't like that. Like, it's not just this, like they prefer it not, they don't benefit from it. But figuring out, how do I highlight the impact of the work that they did? And so this program that person X started, here's the impact it's having on this team, and here are the development opportunities it's created, and trying to focus more on the impact of their work and almost like removing them because it doesn't like benefit them, but figuring out a way to give the credit and at the same time, again, recognize like the impact of the work. Cause I think that's what, so people hear more than just like the name of who did it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like you said, making sure it's very specific and tailored and flexible for those people, because, they just want to be in the background. I think it's similar to like what you said of like, sometimes we promote people into leadership roles or management roles and they're like, I don't want to do this. Like this was terrible. I hate managing people. I just want to go back to doing my job. And so it's you gotta kind of take the same approach of like, does this person actually want this? Is this how they're going to appreciate it? And even if you do have those people who really like public recognition, you still have to give them the private recognition, doing it in the one-on-ones and those things. It can't just be like, oh, I gave them like a shout out in our Slack channel. That's enough. No, you still have to give them the recognition in your one-on-ones, in maybe a private message, or even just on their project work. Like, hey, this project was done really well. Here are the things that I think you did really, really well on. Great job. Moving forward.
Yeah, it just makes like the power of effective frequency, like whether we're talking about recognition or any type of org-wide change or anything, of just it's saying. I always tell managers when I'm training them of like, when you're sick of saying it, you might be getting close to saying it enough, like, because you just have to remind people whether it's recognition or something different, because there's a lot of inputs all day and it's nice to be reminded of that.
Yeah. I always tell our exec team when we're rolling out something new, they're like, I'm like, you have to say something at minimum 7 times before it sticks with people. And so how are we going to say this 7 times to people? What are our 7 different channels? How are we going to repeat this over and over again? So people are like, by the time we're done communicating, they're like, oh dear God, stop talking about this. I'm done now. Yep. I understand. That's when people have gotten it.
Totally. No, every time I'm like, man, people don't read. I'm like, no, you just didn't say it enough.
Definitely. So I think we kind of made it through most of our questions. And I want to remind folks, if you have questions about recognition programs, how to do it, throw them in the comments. But I think this is one that I think is interesting. And I think it's more of like sort of the back end, and people don't always consider it. And it's another way to kind of pitch it up to your leadership. But like, how does a recognition program fit into a total reward strategy? Because it is part of your total reward strategy if there's a monetary component in there, or if you're doing draws or whatever, or if you're using it as part of your performance management to then promote people. So it is a consideration to have. And like, how are we, using recognition in conjunction with compensation, with our benefits and all these other things? I think it's not this standalone thing, but it needs to be tied into your overall sort of benefits and engagement practices with your organization, with your employees. I don't know if you've ever done this with LifeLabs Learning when it comes to training and learning and development. I'm sure you have, but how do you coach HR people or managers or leaders who want to, do this? How do you coach them into like, it's got to be part of this overall budget that you're talking about? It can't be this standalone thing that you're just asking to be added in at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this related to any people program is like, how does this fit into like the holistic ecosystem of what we're trying to accomplish? And so for me, I think if I'm going to coach somebody of how it fits in, like having the conversation, think, okay, if performance management conversations look like this, where does recognition support that, right? Where does recognition detract from that? Perhaps like maybe people only hear they're great and then actually you think they're a low performer, so making sure that folks are thinking about that package truly as a package. And I think not trying to just solve a bunch of issues with one thing of like, oh, in an absence of us training our managers on feedback, or in an absence of like making sure our leaders are skilled at giving recognition, we'll just give them this program and that will suffice. Like, how does it fit into the broader ecosystem of all of the programs that we have in place? And then I imagine too, like appropriately weighting all of those different pieces as well. And so how much weight essentially are putting to the recognition versus the data on your performance that comes up in the performance management, versus the compensation that you're going to provide. So I think putting the puzzle pieces together and thinking about it holistically, so you can then understand and then paint the narrative for the employees of like how it actually fits too. Because if is just a side dish, that's how people are going to feel about it. And so making sure that the story we tell about all of the total rewards are actually in a compelling way that makes sense for people.
I love that. I love that. And that's that transparent piece of like bringing people along for the ride, telling them why we're doing this, making sure they've got a little bit of buy-in, they're getting some feedback on it, and ensuring that, yeah, they understand the why. This is why we built out our total rewards package this way. Kind of ties into your compensation philosophies and all those kind of things. I think the other piece that we talk a lot about is, we generally coach people like, put 1 or 2% of your payroll into a recognition program, because like it's not a lot if you think about it. And if you just gave everyone a 1% raise for that year, it doesn't mean anything. It just gets eaten up by taxes. Like, and even if you went to someone like, we're giving you a 1% raise, they'd be like, why? What does that even mean? But if you put 1% into a recognition program or 2% into a recognition program, and then they're getting like $50 here, $100 there, $25 here for things that they've actually done and appreciate. And then it's just like, oh, that's great. I can I'm going to, maybe save up some of these, or like, oh, I can go out for coffee for a few times this week and it's paid for the company, or like you did a really great job, or like, hey, I saw you hit your objective, 3 weeks ahead of time. Great job. Here's a $50 gift card, or here's lunch on me, or whatever it looks like. It just, again, helps continue to reinforce that behavior, reinforce the things that you're trying to do. And it feels good. We know from the psychology of humans that when we get a reward that's kind of spontaneous and out of the blue, all those good endorphins and chemicals get released in our brain, and we feel good about things. And it again, it reinforces that I am appreciated here, I am doing good work here, and I am contributing to the company. That's great. I'm going to stay here. And so those little signals are so much more powerful than just giving somebody a annual 2% raise, because they'll forget about it in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And I think too, you have, it's like doing it via recognition gives you so many different levers to pull, where like, yeah, a 1% raise may not be that noticeable, but like getting consistent feedback about values and getting getting rewarded, recognized because you are living into the company's values. Those are often hard to like fully just promote somebody because they're a good, we call ourselves lab mates. Like, I'm not going to get promoted for just being a good lab mate. But with a recognition program, like you elevate those almost beyond what would just happen through a raise or just through compensation. So I think it allows you to look at the employee really as a whole individual in all of the contributions they're making, and not just the value of their output or the productivity side of things.
And like, honestly, I think it does remove some of the bias out of things, because they're getting recognized by multiple people, not just their manager. And so I'm going to use this as a segue to bring in somebody's question right here of like, what do you do if your manager wants to get all the limelight and makes you feel invisible? Skip level, go to their manager, talk to their manager about that. Like, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's like, go to their manager and talk to them and give that feedback, because like that's an issue that should probably be addressed right away. Because as managers, I firmly believe that your job is to give all of the credit to your team when things are going well, and kind of take all the crap when things are going bad. That's your job as a manager, is to shield your team and make them feel great and appreciated for the successes that they're making. So I don't know if you have any other tidbits.
You're more generous. I was like, this is a reason why people are more likely to leave organizations. I'm like, go find a manager that will value you. But what I would say, another approach, I would say +1 to what Noah said. And another approach too is, how do you band together with your peers as well? There's a great story, and I know it comes out of the Obama years in the White House, a handful of employees where they were not getting some credit that they expected. They started banding together, and they would essentially like elevate each other's ideas almost like 2 to 3 times every time they came out in a meeting, as a way to like create that credit being given. And so I think, are there opportunities to recognize your peers and then ask for that back, so that at least you all are making each other visible, and then figuring out a way to share that with other teams. But I think, what other resources do you also have in peers are often one that I would lean into.
Awesome. Great. And then we've got another question that I want to talk about. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but let's maybe expand on it. From it's known that different people like to be recognized in different ways: publicly, privately, written, verbal, etc. Could it be damaging to recognize employees in different ways? This is where I kind of come back to like, this is where you need to lean on your managers and have them have those conversations with people of like, just ask the simple question: how do you like to be recognized? I think it's so simple. We don't really need to over-engineer this or overthink it. Just have the conversation with people. We're thinking of implementing a recognition program. How do you like to be recognized for your contributions? And people will tell you. They'll be very honest most of the time of like how they would prefer to be recognized. And maybe it is, I don't care. However you want to do it, that's great. Publicly, privately, I don't like, as long as it's happening, that's awesome for me. Where other people are like, I really don't want it publicly, only do it here. Or other people are like, I want it in my one-on-one so we can talk about it and I can get some more context. And then there's other people who are like, want it in that written form because they want to sit there and process it and then comment on it. So I think it is just having the conversation with people and seeing how they prefer to be recognized.
Yeah. And I think too that Sarah, the question here around like, could it be damaging? I think the risk you run is the only public recognition that you give are to the people that like public recognition. And there's never the folks that otherwise are never going to be recognized or noticed by the team. And so I think that's where we have to get really creative of like, maybe someone doesn't want public recognition, but they would love the opportunity to facilitate this meeting, or maybe they don't want public recognition here, but they would love the opportunity. Can I create an opportunity for them as well? And I think though it is being really mindful as managers around what those biases are to only name certain people. And I think, again, having multiple avenues to recognize everybody. So it's not just like either public recognition or not. Speaking similar to what Noah's saying there, but I think giving multiple ways and giving people recognition in various fashions will help you get away from like only recognizing them in one specific way.
And yeah, and again, do it often, because if you do it often and if you do it wrong, they'll tell you and then you can course correct quickly. But if you only give them recognition once every 3 months and you did it wrong, then it just has so much more weight. But if you're doing it every week and like maybe you make a mistake and you forget it, then they'll be like, hey, I didn't really like that. And like, right, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'll try never to do that again. And kind of course correct from there. But I think we are coming up into our last 2 minutes. And so I know wanted to like do a little outro and do a little thank you to everyone. And so I'm just going to bring back my slides for a minute. But thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, McKendree, for your time. Yes. I learned some things. I hope everyone here learned some things. And it was a great conversation around recognition, which I could talk about for days. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, I am so appreciative of this conversation and having you all here listening and contributing. And Noah, yeah, we think we could nerd out forever on recognition and in org psychology. I'll just say that if you're interested in any of the topics that I covered around feedback skills, coaching skills, those are things that we train managers and teams on. Would love to have a conversation. So feel free to reach out to me or hello@lifelabslearning.com. But would love to continue to support you all in this space.
Yeah, and we just threw up a little banner with a link. So, if you want to connect with somebody immediately or go sign up, here's the link. Check it out. Go talk to the people at LifeLabs Learning. They're amazing. Highly recommend them. You should check it out if you're doing anything around coaching and development, learning. It'll change your organization. It'll help boost all the things that you're trying to do by getting your managers to level up. It's investing in your managers and your leaders is one of those things that like every organization should be doing all the time. Yeah. So check it out. And so again, thank you for attending our Recognition Renaissance webinar. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Guusto and what we're doing, reach out to info@guusto.com. You're also happy to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat recognition and HR and people and all those fun things. But hit us up, let us know. We're all here to talk to you and help you. And like, even if you don't know where to start, just, reach out, let us know. We'll have a conversation and kind of help guide you through the conversation and get things rolling. So again, and another thing that I like to plug, just a little thing that we're kind of doing on a weekly basis is we're doing what we call the Culture Clinic. And so this is a live event. We have it here on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and it's really an Ask Us Anything where, one of our co-founders sits down with a people leader and we talk about hot topics. And so next week's is pay transparency. And so if you're interested in learning about pay transparency and asking questions, join us next week at the Culture Clinic and get the insights from an executive and from an HR leader who's done this before and has a lot of great thoughts on it. So thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day. Thank you again, McKendree and the LifeLabs team for joining us. I think that's it. Have a great week, everybody.
See ya.